picking the positives from the remaining NFL Week 10 games. That is what we are doing today on RotoViz OT. We're going to look through as many of them as we can in this episode, and then we'll hopefully have a positive outlook ahead of NFL Week 11. Shawn, we got into a show yesterday where I kicked it off and said something along the lines of partly a therapy session. The game we didn't get to that I needed that for was the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Washington Commanders. And that was mostly down to, I cannot watch these games as a sane-minded person when Russell Wilson has been involved this season. So there may be some like views as we go through it that are more on the extreme end of it. But when we look at the game, we get a win for the Steelers in a situation where they're on the road against the Commanders, who have been very good this season. Interesting enough, if you look at some of the teams they have beat in terms of their overall winning records, they may have beaten some teams, but you can only beat what's in front of you. They do lose this one to the Steelers, who are now 7-2. Russell Wilson is 14 of 28, 195, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He does take 3 sacks for 23 yards. But the big talking point coming out of this game, Shawn, I guess, is we get a one-target game for Mike Williams. He gets a 32-yard touchdown on a nice play from him late in the game to win it. You also get George Pickens, who has a touchdown on one of his 7 targets. He's 5 for 91. He makes an incredible touchdown catch where, there's certain plays when we're talking about quarterback throws or wide receiver plays and, how to make these, and is it close or is it not close? We talked a little bit about Trey McBride and who's that one on. This touchdown, Shawn, is 100%, maybe even more than 100% if that's possible, on George Pickens with a fantastic dive-in reception. We don't get a lot from anyone else in the offense from a receiving perspective. We get 6 targets to Calvin Austin in this one for 2 receptions for 20 yards. It's spread around the rest of the way. So it really is a case that he is getting George Pickens going, but it's George Pickens and no one else. We get a lot of rushing attempts in this. We get 43 for 140 and 1 touchdown in total for the Steelers. 14 of those going to Jaylen Warren for 66. We get Najee Harris 21 for 53 and a touchdown. The Steelers, Shawn, for me, are rather infuriating because it's there's one play that they have, and that is a moon ball towards the sidelines. And maybe the defensive coordinators want to, put that on their playbook to try and stop them from scoring. Again, as I mentioned at the start, I am a little bit biased, but it is a case of like negative play after negative play per play. Maybe they get a flag or a penalty to keep it going. And then, they launch one of these every so often. And, if you complete 50% of your passes, and most of them are these, sideline, almost punt passes, it's going to lead to some completions when George Pickens is out here making some amazing contested catches. So we'll start off with that side before we get to look at the Commanders a little bit. But what's your thoughts here on what is going on with the Steelers? And am I just overthinking this because I would prefer Justin Fields to be the starting quarterback?
Yeah, there are a variety of things here. And one of the things that the Steelers did to Justin Fields is they put him in a lot of difficult situations and then blamed him for those situations. But I think you could certainly make the case that while they've opened things up for Russell Wilson and made it quite a bit easier on him, they're still not making it easy, right? You talk about this as George Pickens and nobody else. That's because they have nobody else. Their team construction has been...
They did sign Jonathan Agnew today, if that helps. He's now on the roster.
We'll see what Mike Williams can do. Mike Williams, obviously a bad fit for the New York Jets. Colm, obviously, everyone right now, a poor fit for Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. He does make that play in the corner of the end zone. We saw George Pickens make really one of the all-time great catches, because so many of the great catches have a flukiness element to them where a receiver contorts his body, sticks one hand out, manages to stab the ball. This play with Pickens is almost a full 180 on the twist, and then he gets both hands there and he doesn't make the catch look easy by any stretch, but he makes the catch look repeatable, which isn't something I think you would say about most of the other catches that are held up as greatest catches of all time. I mean, this is a situation right now where if George Pickens played on a competent team, we might be talking about him as Justin Jefferson. Now, I still think there are things in terms of speed, like consistent speed, in terms of route running, in terms of just consistency and level of play. All of those types of things, Pickens probably still needs to elevate. Certainly he's got effort issues and all of that type of thing as well. But I mean, you talk about the catch point. Certainly George Pickens is the guy in the entire NFL right now. And it's the perfect fit, right? Because that's what Russell Wilson does. We talk about what the situation was last year where Jerry Jeudy is, at least according to a wide variety of stats, is an elite separator. He was running wide open throughout the season last year. Russell Wilson's passes are nowhere near him. And then he throws these moon balls up to him, and Jerry Judy's like, I don't know what to do with that, right? George Pickens knows what to do with it. They're very different types of players, very different fits. I mean, this is 14 for 28, and Russell Wilson still looked bad. If you remove those 2 key plays, then he looks terrible. But you don't remove the 2 key plays. Those 2 key plays are the reason why the Steelers win this game. So I think from that perspective, you've got to like what they're doing. They're unlocking the remaining strengths of the quarterback. The thing that I struggle with a little bit here is the 21 for 53 for Najee Harris. Now you go and look at the advanced stats coming into this game, and Harris is having another one of those seasons, a lot like Josh Jacobs, where these guys break a ton of tackles. They're over the course of many seasons, they're not very good at gaining yards. But the breaking tackles component of it is very consistent, and A, coaches like that, and then B, there are stretches where yards do come from it. And when you're in one of those hot stretches or just one of those fluky stretches, we get weird sequencing elements with players like Harris and Jacobs where the broken tackles do lead to some production. I just would prefer to see them put him in a little bit better position. Now, when you get the 53 yards, when you get the touchdown, you do end up with a viable starting fantasy performance, but we're probably swiftly moving back in the direction of Jaylen Warren being easily the best player on this offense, certainly from a running back perspective. He's arguably the best running back in all of football over the last 2 years. It would have been interesting to see if he could have held that level at the type of volume that the true stars play at. All of the injuries coming into the season, we knew he wasn't healthy, probably gets re-injured. Someone of his, well, really any NFL player, but certainly someone of his profile operating at 70% isn't going to be that impressive. He hasn't been very impressive. He looked good in this game. Now, the obvious asterisk there is he also had a fumble that should have cost them the game. It's nice for him that Wilson makes that pass to Williams, that Williams makes the play, that they win the game. That way you don't have to spend the week in the spotlight like a Chase Brown, like a Tyrone Tracy. You win the game. All is good. He looked fantastic. And then, Colm, we have to look at the other side of the ball where Jayden Daniels also only completed 50% of their passes. This is an interesting game where you get 2 well above average defenses. It is a tough context. Both quarterbacks make some plays and miss some plays. For Jayden Daniels, one of the key misses is a brutal drop by De'Ami Brown in the end zone. That would have given him a touchdown. That would have really helped his fantasy day. But the other thing that the Steelers do is keep him in the pocket, reduce the scrambling. Teams are going to try and replicate what the Steelers did here, but the fact of the matter is that Washington still moved the ball, still scored, probably should have won. Colm, are they no longer doing the respot the ball and measure element of it? We do have some differences with replay now, right? We have the replay assist. We have all those types of things. I don't think I've ever seen a situation go to replay where a team is cheated by a full yard. Maybe you think that he was still short, and he might have been still millimeters short. But the last play in terms of Washington offense was Zach Ertz on the 4th down. I mean, he spotted a yard short. They review it, and they spot him again a yard short. That's not the way that replay is supposed to work. For all the progress that they're making with replay assist, every time they've had to go and look at difficult plays, they've gotten them wrong.
Some of the replay assist stuff I think has been like very, very positive from just a watching experience in terms of like, you're like, well, you can clearly see his feet are in there or his feet are out, and they're, they can hold it for a couple of seconds and get the decision right. But this was one where it was way off. It was a bad spot originally. And then, my assumption here, Shawn, is they say, they couldn't tell exactly where maybe the ball is at that point. So if they put it down, it's a guess of where the actual ball is spotted, which is always unfortunate in those situations. I was baffled as to how quick they also made the decision to say that it was a turnover on downs. And again, I'm not being a hater here on the Steelers, or maybe I am, but this is a game where they get a muff punt that leads to the Pat Freiermuth touchdown in this game. then you get decisions like this where teams are going to potentially take the lead in this particular situation. So there's a lot of good fortune that went their way in this contest. But the one part, Shawn, I also want to mention is Jayden Daniels did complete 50% of his passes, and this was a tough defensive matchup, as you mentioned. There was some struggles in it for him. I thought while he only had 5 receptions, Terry McLaurin had 113 yards, and he had some incredible catches in this game. I'm saying on the George Pickens stuff that the touchdown is 100% on him. There's some of these passes that they're good throws, but they're exceptional catches. But the other part I wanted to highlight is Daniels has what we would class as a down game because doesn't have the rushing, just 3 rush attempts for 5 yards, 202 passing yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. But Austin Eckler's 2 touchdowns in this game, both from 1 yard out. Jeremy McNichols has a short rushing touchdown. You mentioned the Dyami Brown drop that led to one of Austin Eckler's touchdowns. So this has had the potential to be, a huge game for him. You could potentially have 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown or 2 rushing touchdowns. The way we're seeing Jalen Hurts, for example, who we'll talk about in a moment, and how his performances are just, he's averaging 2 rushing touchdowns a game over the last 4 games. So it could have been a much different day for Daniels, but that's just when you go up against a tough defense, and they come out here with a tough loss at the very end of this game. Shawn, I don't think
that they're going to jam Jayden Daniels into the line the way they do with Jalen Hurts, but I do think the ease of those short yardage touchdowns is due to the threat of Daniels. And so you see so many things opened up by his package of traits that you're mostly not getting from other QBs. And you think about all the gimmicky stuff that other teams are having to do to try and make sure they can execute in short yardage. We may get some different situations later this season or in future seasons where teams do force Jayden Daniels to carry some. The thing here is that you just really don't want your quarterback to take those hits. And one of the sneak is that you can get rolled up on your legs. Patrick Mahomes had that happen at one point where then he has a hip injury. I mean, it's not that there's zero risk, but these quarterbacks are going down so early when they run at most points this season. And you want to see that. The last thing we need is a situation like we have now with the Dallas Cowboys where, they basically aren't an NFL team the rest of the way. Having said that, Jayden Daniels, absolutely fantastic. They should have won this game. As you mentioned, Terry McLaurin, astonishingly good. You think about what the defense is forcing you to do. One of the things I still would question with McLaurin is the ability to draw targets. Unbelievable plays in this game, unbelievable plays a week ago. Actually, not very many targets across those games. Now, some of that is the opposing defense knows that, similar to the case with a Russell Wilson, Terry McLaurin is all Washington has. Jayden Daniels is doing all of this with a very weak supporting cast, right? This is one of the weaker ones in the entire NFL, and he's doing what he's doing. At some point, they're going to have stronger players than Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, Dyami Brown. Maybe at some point they'll play a Ben Sinnott, or they'll just bring in some players who really do complement what they're doing. Even from a running back perspective, it's really cool to see Austin Eckler do what he's doing right now. Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, when he's healthy, those guys are solid. At some point, maybe this team ends up being similar to the Eagles, similar to the Ravens, and you're talking about the type of blitzkrieg that, like this game with the Steelers, would never be in doubt.
We're going to talk, Shawn, about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. You mentioned them a moment ago, and the Cowboys are on the other side of that. The Cowboys had a lot of trouble in this one, couldn't really create any yards. They have 29 pass attempts between Trey Lance and Cooper Rush for 49 passing yards and 1 interception. The interception on Trey Lance. He did have 4 of 6, obviously that interception as well sprinkled in there, but everyone struggled in this game. As a result, we do get double-digit targets to CeeDee Lamb. He gets 10 receptions, but that is just for the 6 catches and 21 yards to go along with it. Shawn, we've talked about it in the show before. The Cowboys have an issue with how the stadium is set up in terms of the sun coming through. CeeDee Lamb has a touchdown in this where the ball is catchable, but he can't see the ball. He makes no effort to catch it, but it's down to how the stadium is set up. Jerry Jones, not of the opinion to add curtains to the stadium. He did reiterate that again this week. So this will continue for Cowboys players. On the other side, Shawn, we get 7 targets for A.J. Brown. He has 5 receptions for 109. Everyone else is kind of kept quiet, but we do get Dallas Goedert back in the lineup. He has a touchdown. We get Johnny Wilson for a touchdown. So they get the 2 receiving touchdowns. After a huge performance previously, Devontae Smith is held to 2 receptions for 14 yards. But we do get Jalen Hurts, 202 yards, passing, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and then the 2 rushing touchdowns, 7 for 56 on the ground for him. So he has been consistently good in terms of fantasy scoring over the last month. I mentioned his average 2 rushing touchdowns per game in those last 4 games. We did get him out in this early. We had Pickett in early in the fourth quarter as they blew out the Cowboys. The Cowboys' last 2 home games, they now have 0 touchdowns, 10 turnovers. And I did see as well, Shawn, a stat that I can't pull up now. Oh, I found it here. They have now trailed by 20 or more points in the last 5 home games, which is an NFL record. So they are not going well. We had Ezekiel Elliott almost in for a touchdown. This one did fumble it into the end zone for a touchback in the second quarter. So lots of interesting things in this game, Shawn. Dak Prescott, unfortunately, now is going to be out for the rest of the season. What's the hope for the Cowboys, and are the Eagles just, starting to round into shape? There's going to be some weeks where it's, so efficient, like we talked about the Lions, where you're not going to need your guys to put up huge numbers, unfortunately, and you're looking for some of those closer game scripts.
Perhaps one of the elements with Jalen Hurts is that, and the thing that makes him so dynamic for fantasy, is that they have him surrounded with so much talent. And the goal line sneaks create so much fantasy potential that he can play relatively poorly and still have a huge game. Now, I think that a lot of people just looking at the box score are going to be like, 14 for 20, 202 yards, averages over 10 yards per attempt, throws 2 touchdowns, scores twice. How is that possibly a poor game?
And I am going to hold it up here, Shawn, that he didn't have a third passing touchdown, but Trevon Diggs had an incredible interception in this game where it is going to be a passing touchdown in the end zone, and he's intercepted. Again, that boosts that game again.
He also takes 5 sacks, which is a huge percentage of his dropbacks. It's a huge percentage of his dropbacks. Yeah. And he has Devontae Smith open for like a 60, 70-yard touchdown. I'm not sure what the line of scrimmage was. It would have been a long, long touchdown. And he underthrows it by like 7 yards. Devontae Smith is way beyond his defender, like yards beyond his defender. The ball goes up, and you can see like, I have not only do I have to stop running, I have to retrace my steps. The defender passes him going the other direction, interferes with him. He almost catches the ball. That's how you end up with 2 for 14 when you're Devontae Smith, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. A.J. Brown gets the 15 points in this game. That's still a little bit disappointing, probably, if you're looking at what the upside is here. And that's in many ways what the ceiling is, unless you get in the end zone. Now, you can say that's going to be true for most players. It shouldn't be true for a player of A.J. Brown's talent. You look at Saquon Barkley. He's having a fantastic year. It'll be interesting to see where he finishes because he's now sprinkled in a few of these types of games. And they repeatedly have situations where they could get him touchdowns and don't do it.
He's got hit a little bit with that DeAndre Swift thing from last year where, like, in this game, he does a really nice catch and run. He's tackled at the 1-yard line. And then that's one of the Hurts rushing touchdowns. One more yard and, it changes the outlook again of that day.
Yeah.
But you do not want to be getting tackled at the 1-yard line when you have Jalen Hurts around.
No, and it's just so tough, right? Because you can be as efficient as you want on low value touches. And there has been no one in the NFL that compares to Saquon Barkley on low value touches this year. But if you're not going to get catches, that catch you just referenced was his only one, and you're not going to get goal line carries, then it's difficult to really put up the big totals. Again, we'll see where he goes. One of the things we've mentioned is that his schedule is so good that it's really hard to see a scenario where people who don't have him are going to get bailed out. And yet this is one of the small risks of a good schedule, which is that your team wins so easily that Will Shipley and Kenneth Gainwell combine for more carries.
Shawn, there was a number of games that we've kind of hinted at as we've gone through these shows that, there was desperate performances this week. The height of those may have been, and I think when I say may have been, it definitely was the Chicago Bears performance against the New England Patriots. Shane Waldron, over the course of the last couple of hours, has been vacated of his duties as offensive coordinator for the Bears. Shawn, there's even been talk about, getting Bijan in there over Caleb Williams as the season goes on. I think you have to stick with the quarterback in there. But he just goes above 50% passing this week, 16 of 30, 120 yards, but does take 9 sacks for 51 yards. And he is under a lot of pressure behind that offensive line. But, at some point there is sacks on the quarterback here as well. So pretty much everyone struggled on the Bears side, and a lot of people struggled on the Patriots side. But I thought Drake Maye again, Shawn, when we're talking about offensive lines, the concern heading into the season was that he was going to be behind this dreadful Patriots offensive line, which it is. But I think that he is able to, with his play, elevate the team to a certain level. There's a lot of plays in this game, as a combination that aren't great for the Patriots overall, but I don't think any of that is really on Drake Maye. He is 1 touchdown, 1 interception, just 184 passing yards. And this one, he goes 4 for 24 on the ground. But they rushed the ball 35 times for just 144 total yards. Any takeaways here? Jalen Polk, just the 1 target, 1 reception for 2 yards, but does get the receiving touchdown in this one. Am I imagining Drake Maye is helping this offense? Because the offense is still quite dreadful. And what are we doing with the Bears moving forward?
Yeah, the offense is still bad. That's the part that I think is mildly disappointing. Ramondre Stevenson, not an efficient game, but you can look at the overall body of work this season, and he is performing well, not fantastically, not magically, but he's performing well. The problem that you have here is that if Austin Hooper, Demario Douglas, and Kayshon Boutte are your key weapons on offense, you just need an entirely new cast of characters. It's a really weird contrast in this game where you have a young QB who looks good, he's going to probably take some sacks. He's probably going to throw some picks. The pick that he does throw in this game was one of the weirder ones you'll ever see because he sort of stared down the defender for
He needed to throw it away. And it's one of those where I almost thought, did he think he was throwing it hard enough to throw it out of bounds? But he just threw it straight to the...
Well, no, it was the defender and then his target and then behind that defender and then behind that, the out of bounds. And so you needed to clear like 3 different obstacles in order to get it out of bounds. He was trying to, get it in between, but he threw it right to the defender. Which if you've been staring at that defender the entire play, it just looks weird, right? He threw a very nice touch pass to the defender. The other 24 passing attempts look good, right? He looks really good. So I think that part, you have to be over the moon if you're a New England Patriots fan, because in so many ways, everything does come back to the quarterback. It's interesting to watch the Chicago Bears and to watch Caleb Williams, as you were mentioning, the coordinator change. We'll see what that does. They're also talking about Williams himself and all of the problems that he has, the lack of pocket awareness, the lack of balance in his footwork, the poor decision-making, the lack of vision, the lack of accuracy. Those are some pretty damning weaknesses for a guy who was viewed as a generational prospect. I think that the biggest concern for me when you look at his resume coming in is simply that he was so good as a freshman. And then he was, again, so good as a sophomore, but maybe not that like epic level that you're thinking after his freshman year, especially when he's surrounded by a lot of talent and is getting to play with the former Biletnikoff winner and Jordan Addison. And then you look at him as a junior and again, no step forward. You have someone like a Jayden Daniels where the big knock on him is that he's in college for so long. But unlike the situation with Williams, where they've created this really favorable context around him the whole time, Jayden Daniels is spending a lot of that time with Herm Edwards. Jayden Daniels actually had a fantastic freshman season. You get into some problems in the middle. He comes out and he has this final season, which again, as an older player playing against younger players, it's as a QB when you have somehow both Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, it's very fair to question that production within that context. But even when you go back and look at him as a freshman in college, he was good. And you look at the skills, the traits, it's really easy to say now, but one of the things that we did mention fairly consistently through the draft process, and one of the reasons that I wrote the Rookie 101 series and talked about Jayden Daniels as being definitely in that same group, if not the superior player, is that the traits for Jayden Daniels are more impressive. So really the thing that you're looking at there is this age difference. At this point, it's very obvious that if you were to draft again, Jayden Daniels would be the top pick. It's in some ways maybe a little bit crazy that we're already talking about Caleb Williams as being a bust. I think especially when we know that especially in 2024, scheme and coaching matters so much. It's hard not to look at the massive performance from Jackson Smith and Jigba a week ago and think about how he was really neutralized by this same coordinator. At the same time, you look at the receivers out there and their body language is awful. Now, the body language being awful, I think, is partly because they also don't believe in the routes. They also don't believe in the scheme. And yet a lot of the awful body language occurs at the end of a play where the ball is thrown at their feet. And so we did all of this work and we managed to make a Shane Waldron play borderline viable. And then you threw a terrible pass. So, there's so many things going on here and so many concerns that you have to get across. One of the things I would note with this 9-sack game is that the offensive line has also been eviscerated. So you're talking about a situation where you have a terrible scheme, you have no blocking. As offensive linemen got hurt in game, you started to then have defenders just stream through almost untouched. I don't know how anybody is going to play well in that environment, but at the same time, Caleb Williams has not played well.
It hasn't played well, and we'll see what the changes do now as they move forward into week 11. But it is hard to see a situation like that. And, we talked about the Panthers and how they struggled and how Bryce Young struggled last year. And then we get him getting a win this week in the international game in Germany. And there's such positivity watching how his body language has even changed in that short amount of time he was out and then come back in again. But the Bears, it seemed like had set up their first overall quarterback for some success, and that hasn't been the case really this season. Shawn, when we look at the New Orleans Saints, this was a weird and wonderful game as well. 20-17, they beat the Falcons. Could have been an absolutely massive day for Alvin Kamara. He has 55 rushing yards. He has 54 receiving yards on 6 targets where he had 5 receptions. Shawn, in the fourth quarter with 1:40 to play to seal the game, Derek Carr delivers a pass to him that would have been basically a walking 70-yard touchdown. And for a back that you're so confident in his hands, it was baffling that he didn't come away with that one. So that meant that the Falcons then had a chance to tie it to get it to overtime, and they had some dreadful play call and dreadful execution, and they did not get this game to overtime. But we have talked a few times on the show about Bijan Robinson and some of his traits, and sometimes it feels like he lacks that true breakaway speed. And maybe it's the defensive backs here for the Saints, but it looked like on that second touchdown, the balance that he showed and kind of the breakaway to get away from him, I was very impressed to see that from him. He has now scored 21 or more PPR points in his last 5 games. He's doing that obviously as a combination through the air, on the ground. And, there's times where you feel like the days could have been bigger, but it's been a consistent run for him. And then on the other side, we're looking at, and we touched on some of the special teams issues on Monday's show, but Young Wei Koo misses a couple in this game, which leads to them losing in a tight game. At least they could have pushed it to overtime. But MVS, Shawn, has 2 deep touchdowns in this. It feels like he may have fitted in there. He may have replaced Rashid Shaheed in this offense. He has 3 targets for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns on 3 receptions. Shawn, hit me with your thoughts here on this particular game.
Kirk Cousins has been so good. And in many ways, he was that good again. Averages over 8 yards per attempt, throws for over 300 yards. When you get 300 yards passing from Kirk Cousins, when you have your three receiving weapons all involved, you get 50-plus yards for Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts. You have 22 targets for London and Mooney combined. That's one of the things that we love about the Falcons, is that so many of these teams have looked at what defenses are trying to do and said, okay, if you're going to take away our stars, then we'll throw to the third string tight end over and over and try to run some trick plays with our running backs. The Falcons understand that if you have a variety of stars, play them off of each other and make it difficult for the defense to account for all of them. Now, part of what's happening here is the Atlanta Falcons and New Orleans Saints play in the NFC South. So you're basically playing in the minor leagues and your numbers are going to look better. But the stats here on offense, it would be impossible to look at this game and think that they lost, much less not winning in a blowout. But Cousins does throw a pick. He also fumbles twice, both of which were recovered by the Falcons. That part could have been a lot worse. You have the 3 missed kicks by Koo, who's one of the best kickers in the NFL. I'm sure that part was pretty stunning to them. Certainly in the games both this week and this season, we've watched when teams do accept the field goal and how much trouble that can cause them. Just last night, the Rams continue to sort of blow up in the red zone and on its periphery, take a bunch of field goals. Now, some of those were tactical, where they continued to get 4th downs, where they were going to need 2 scores anyway. In other situations, they probably would have simply gone for it. In a game like this, 20-17, obviously those 3 field goals are decisive. One thing I would like to note with Derek Carr, he does have quite a few weaknesses as a quarterback. Michael Thomas very much wants to tell you what all of those are. But Derek Carr, one of the best vertical throwers in the NFL. It was cracking me up when MVS gets deep, scores the long touchdown, gets another equally long play where he doesn't quite score, and then fate was on his side. He scores the short touchdown immediately after that. Those are his 3 catches. Derek Carr last season, in a wide variety of metrics, I believe IQR, points above average, and just simply deep passing yards, throws to travel 20 yards in the air. He was the 5th best quarterback in the NFL. He's a fantastic vertical passer. Any Saints team should have that incorporated in. We know that Shaheed benefited from quite a high number of perfectly placed deep balls early. They've lost that with the injury to Carr and with the injury to the receivers. Derek Carr probably is never going to have his moment in the way that Baker Mayfield is right now, but Derek Carr is one of those guys where in the right circumstance, which, he's played for bad teams, and a little bit of that is on him, because if you are a below average starting quarterback and you play on below average teams, then people are going to pretty consistently think that you're not even a viable starting quarterback. Derek Carr is pretty good. He's just not going to elevate the kinds of teams that he has played on. It'll be interesting to see what he does going forward. In the back of Valdez-Scantling's mind, he's like, I got to play with Patrick Mahomes, who's a lot better than Derek Carr, but also one of those guys does throw the deep ball better.
He also played with Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers, so Derek Carr clearly the one here to unlock him moving forward from that list. Shawn, the other play that I didn't mention slipped my mind. Taysom Hill had a 88-yard receiving touchdown called back in this for a holding penalty as well, which nullified it. So another interesting play, and just another way they're adding him in, getting more snaps in the offense, which I think is not the best way, but when they have so many injuries and limited, you can see why they're doing it. A couple of games, Shawn, to go through quickly. We have a play that we referenced on Monday's podcast. We were talking about Levis and that deep touchdown he got to Calvin Ridley early. This was a game where he kind of makes his way through it. He has a great touchdown pass early. He has a great touchdown pass again to Ridley in garbage time. That means Ridley has those 2 touchdowns, 5 for 84 and 2. Not a lot else going on in the receiving game. We get a split backfield. Tony Pollard is on the sideline for parts of this game, working through an injury, but he has 9 carries. We have 7 carries to Tyjae Spears, 5 to Will Levis, so it's all split there. As I've talked about recently, some of Justin Herbert's play has looked very, very good, but he is just 18 pass attempts in this for 14 completions, 164 and a touchdown. That touchdown going to Quentin Johnson, who gets in the end zone again, but just the 2 targets for 24 yards for him. Will Disley is 6 targets, Shawn, 5 receptions for 30. But outside of that, J.K. Dobbins is 3. Nobody else with more than 2. And then the backfield is kind of split again because we have Gus Edwards back. He has 10 carries for 55. We have J.K. Dobbins 15 for 50. And then Herbert rushed for a touchdown himself. He has 9 for 32. And Hassan Haskins rushed 1 touchdown, 2 for 4 yards for him. So they have 39 rush attempts to the 18 pass attempts. Any thoughts coming out of this other than Harbaugh wants to control the run game?
Well, certainly Calvin Ridley. He's the wide receiver 3 over the last 3 weeks. He wants you to get him involved in the game early because he knows that his catchable percentage on target passes is very low. The more chances that he gets, the more big plays that he can make. He is a big play receiver. Volume always helps. Calvin Ridley's like, I've read those earlier RotoViz articles. Give me the ball. Even if I make some mistakes, I'm going to score some touchdowns here. Will Levis, 7 sacks. It's not all on him, but he's usually back there in the pocket acting like defenders don't exist. You have to balance out.
If there is a positive, Shawn, of those 7 sacks, he only lost 18 yards, which I think is quite impressive.
So we'll see. The frustrating thing in this game, if you have Tony Pollard, which we don't, if you have J.K. Dobbins, which we do, is that the return of Gus Edwards, the return of Tyjae Spears. Now, you mentioned with Pollard, he seemed to be dinged up a little bit, but Edwards comes back and takes 10 carries. The really unfortunate part about that is that he looked pretty good. And so the early struggles, I certainly wouldn't say that they were completely injury related, but anytime that J.K. Dobbins is not performing that efficiently, and you have another player who does a little bit better, especially one that you know the coaches like, I think there are some concerns about how that will work out. Dobbins, a terrible fantasy game here. Spears looked really good. I mean, Spears is probably one of the better running backs in the NFL. He has not been healthy. That has killed him. The offense is bad. That hasn't helped. Tony Pollard has been very good. One of the things that the Titans have talked about is that they want to spell Pollard a little bit so that he doesn't deal with maybe some of the nagging injuries that we saw a little bit in this game, and just to keep him healthy through the season because he's played so well. It's going to be tough in this offense, I think, to generate fantasy value for both players, and Spears is probably the slightly better talent.
The other game that there's some takeaways from, but not a lot. And then we'll get to the one to finish it off with the Lions and the Texans. But the Bills and the Colts, Josh Allen had 2 interceptions in this one, does have a rushing touchdown, no passing touchdowns, does miss a wide open Dalton Kincaid in this one. And then that leads to the same play where he picks up the injury that kind of has him on the sideline for the rest of the game. That was late in the first quarter. Probably does get in for a touchdown there. There was a Josh Allen interception, one of those 2 in the second quarter, where there's really no Bills player near it when it's picked off. But talking about picked off, we get Joe Flacco with a pick 6 early on. We get him with an interception on a screenplay on the next drive. Then, unfortunately for the Colts, we get a downs drop, which is probably going to be a touchdown as well late in the first quarter that they settled for a field goal. Josh Allen, as I mentioned, had that rushing touchdown. Shawn, he is now tied with O.J. Simpson, second all time for rush touchdowns for the Buffalo Bills. So he's a bit like we talked about Jalen Hurts, very effective getting into the end zone, obviously rushing the ball. But Jonathan Taylor is 114 yards on 21 attempts, has just the 4 targets, 2 receptions for 8 yards in the air. So while it, a lot of usage, not a huge amount of fantasy points for him, we do get 10 targets, 4 down, 7 for 72. Could have been a massive day for him if he gets that touchdown that I mentioned. And then Alex Pierce, 7 targets, 4 receptions, 81, and a touchdown going his way. Hit me with your biggest takeaways here, Shawn, from a game that had a lot of issues.
Yeah, if you're a Colts fan, this one is tough because Josh Allen, he has some off games, and he was way off in this one, made a bunch of mistakes. The thing that is probably the most frustrating if you are a Dalton Kincaid fan is that this season, his most egregious misses have been on targets to Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid gets wide open consistently, and Josh Allen always puts the ball somewhere else. That's been too bad. Obviously, the offense overall and the team overall is fantastic. Again, when you have the Josh Allen types of traits, you're simply going to be able to make more mistakes and still lead your team to victory, which is one of the reasons that I think eventually they will come back out of this more conservative mindset. You could even argue that they've done it to an extent in this game where Allen has the 37 passing attempts. James Cook is involved, plays all right. Ray Davis, weirdly uninvolved for someone who just looks so good when he does have a chance to touch it. But those traits are the things that the Colts were looking for with an Anthony Richardson. And it puts a team and a coaching staff in a very difficult bind when you have a player surrounded by a lot of talent. You have a pass-oriented QB who's an old dude who's pretty limited, but is going to be able to run the offense, or you have a quarterback who really probably brings the same types of things that Russell Wilson brings, plus insane athleticism and upside as a runner. And so you're going to get some of the things that Russell Wilson can do where you just throw up that deep ball and give your guys a chance. You get some of the things that Josh Allen can do and you scramble. The problem, again, for Anthony Richardson has just been that the accuracy level, it's not that it's bad, because there are plenty of quarterbacks who are not very accurate, who have this sort of otherworldly skill set beyond that allows them to not just be good, but to be great. It's not a thing where they can kind of overcome it. It's that they're simply stars despite that. Richardson's problem is that his accuracy is so far below any of that you can't move the ball and it saps out the rest of his dynamism. What's the best way for him to improve? One of the things that I've mentioned sort of consistently throughout this argument and debate is that there's probably very little reason to believe that he's any better than Trey Lance. The two guys are very similar. The Cowboys are now in a situation where their really only motivation would be to see what Trey Lance has. And even in a backup situation, they don't seem very inclined to go to him. It'll be tough for the Colts because they've lost these games now with Flacco. He hasn't played particularly well. You could argue that on the non-sacks and non-interception plays, he was fantastic in this game. Unfortunately, those are the games that tend to be those are the plays that tend to be pretty definitive, right? You look at this game from a receiving perspective, and even without Michael Pittman, this team is pretty talented. The biggest takeaway for me is that Adonai Mitchell, if he has a chance, if they are willing to be patient and develop him, if he has a passing quarterback, he's probably going to be really good, right? He only has the 6 targets. He catches all of them. He gains 71 yards. He looks like a star. Josh Downs is open constantly, is making circus catches. Unfortunately, you get the circus catches. As you mentioned, you have the drop on the walk-in touchdown. He would probably trade a circus catch for the easy catch right there. That would have helped him, his team, and his fantasy day. But then you also have Alec Pierce. Now, the touchdown comes deep in garbage time, but there were some other opportunities where he's open and Joe Flacco misses him. That's a pretty good trio, even without Michael Pittman. And then you have Jonathan Taylor, who had a 58-yard run in this game, looked really like peak Taylor. He was just off of having one of those 30-point game performances. The Colts should be a scoring machine. And unfortunately, both the controversy and the weakness that each of their individual quarterbacks bring to the table have kept them from being able to hit that so far this season.
Yeah, and when you look at it then from the perspective of them as an NFL franchise and trying to get to the playoffs this year, the team we're going to talk about now, the Texans, they have lost a couple of games recently, which, with the change to Flacco, and we talked about these games that they potentially could have had some more plays in over the last 2 weeks, but situations where they have lost both of those. So the Texans still have a grasp at the top of that division. They're 6-4. The Lions are now 8-1. They're 5-0 on the road, Shawn. They win 26-23. This game had a lot to talk about. One of the things I thought of was, when the game is unfolding, we're talking about the Lions and how efficient they are and how the game script has been so favorable to them, and they drop down to finish the first quarter. They're 10-0, and I'm thinking, how are the Lions going to do in this game script? Well, the answer was that Jared Goff was going to throw 5 interceptions. And we weren't truly, so the script didn't play out in terms of keeping the ball, moving it down the field. They consistently managed to turn it over. But we also had turnovers from the Houston side. CJ Stroud, Shawn, and this has a wide open Tank Dell in the end zone. And I mentioned earlier the play in the Eagles game where the defender gets back and makes a good interception and Hurts. This was more that there was so much room and then the ball was floated so slowly that he was able to make an interception on what would have been a touchdown to Tank Dell. That would have obviously piled even more pressure on the Lions in this one. So both teams kind of were in their own way, which was kind of the script for the entire week, as people who have listened to both shows will probably get a good feel for. But Stroud has struggled over the last, I would say, 2 months almost at this point. He hasn't finished as a top 12 quarterback since week 4 when they faced the Jaguars. It was week 5 when Nico Collins got hurt, so maybe that's a big part of it. Even when Collins was doing well earlier in the season, we did talk about the offense and some of the struggles they were having outside of him. I did think Tank Dell looked healthier this week. I thought he, compared to what we've seen throughout the course of the season. One of the positives on the Lions side, Shawn, I thought was the way that when when we're talking about the game script and how it was used, there was more Jahmyr Gibbs in there versus David Montgomery when they were trying to come back into this one. Sam Laporta gets a deep touchdown. He has 6 targets. He has 3 receptions for 66 and 1 TD. Amon-Ra has 8 targets, 6 receptions, 60, and a touchdown to go with that. Jameson Williams just has the 53 yards, but I thought it was impressive in terms of contested catches. He takes a massive hit on one of these plays and holds onto the ball. So I thought that was, a different way that we've seen him being used. And Shawn, I don't know if I've ever seen 2 field goals back-to-back by a kicker that were as close to hitting the goalpost and making it over than Jake Bates had in this game, for the one to tie it and the one to win it, which was pretty crazy from him. His story is pretty fun for people who haven't heard anything about him. Check it out. I won't go through it all on the podcast today. But one of the questions I wrote down here, and that was, why are we hitting 58-yard field goals on 4th and 4? Some of the field goal decisions over the last couple of weeks have been strange, but let's try and get a little bit closer, take the 4th down, and try and go and win the game. I'm going to see if you agree with checking it out from that distance. That is for the Texans that I'm talking about there, not the game winner from Jake Bates. The other question, Shawn, is, did CJ Stroud get sacked, have a forced fumble, and then have that fumble recovered by his own offensive lineman? Is that the first time in NFL history that has happened? Do you know the play I'm talking about?
I believe so. You have confused me a little bit in how you set it up. What's your big takeaway here?
Well, there's a lot of things I set up there, but the takeaway on that is offensive linemen should not be trying to take the ball off the quarterback, then cause a fumble. At least he recovered the fumble. That was the one positive. But went down as a sack for the Lions and a forced fumble, but it was all by his own offensive lineman.
I like it. The offensive linemen want to get on the sacks too. You're like, give me some statistics.
Give me the ball.
Yeah. Got to get in that box score. Yeah, it's tricky on that field goal. One of the things that I do like, one of the things that you certainly saw from the Lions, and I think that DeMeco Ryans and the Texans wanted to follow up on, I think it's tough if the other team has just knocked down a 58-yarder with a kicker who in some ways you might argue is borderline to be in the NFL. And then you're like, our good kicker, we're going to pass on this opportunity. One of the things that Dan Campbell does, like no one else. Now, that's obviously not true because you have a situation where Mike Tomlin has willed the Steelers to an above average record for like 2 decades. But leadership matters. It's not the only thing. Good tactics also matter a lot. And you can create a cluster of traits, characteristics as a coach that allow you to lean into your own weaknesses or your own strengths, minimize your weaknesses, and do a fantastic job. But you think about the way the Chiefs game ended with the blocked field goal. You think about the way this Lions game ended with, a 58-yard field goal in today's NFL is not that big of a deal, but it was mentioned as the longest field goal in Detroit Lions history. Then he comes back and knocks down another 50-plus yarder to win. He obviously is ecstatic. The team is excited. You have some teams where if they were always winning by a tiny little margin, then you're going to say there's some flukiness to it, which is one of the reasons why I'm very concerned about Kansas City, very concerned about the quality of play from Patrick Mahomes. But with the Lions, when you're getting these blowout victories, and then you play a very tough opponent like the Texans, you commit 5 turnovers, and then you still win on the road. This is a team with a level of belief that is just very different than you get from other squads. And it's one of the reasons why even a player like Jared Goff, who Colm sadly is no longer in the MVP race, Sean McVay is probably like, see, but you contrast that with the New York Jets and you think about leadership from the QB position as well and how all of that matters. The Lions are the most aggressive team that you're going to ever see on fourth down. And yet, if the fourth down situation doesn't make sense and the game's on the line, they've got a kicker who knows the coach also believes in him, right? It's not a thing where we're going for it on fourth down because we don't think our kicker can make it. We're going for it on fourth down because we're ultra aggressive and we know it makes sense. But when it doesn't make sense, go out there and knock down 50-yarders. This Lions team, I think, is one of the most fun teams the NFL has seen in a long time. They have so many stars. They have a rock star head coach. You get all of these peripheral players who have in these magical moments. It's basically impossible to win a game when you throw 5 picks. But it also does create some weird dynamics. One of the things I mentioned in the Monday write-up was that the Chiefs had 8 drives against the Denver Broncos. One of the problems that they have is that if you are an elite team, you would like there to be more possessions so you have more opportunities to gap your opponent. They were outplayed by the Denver Broncos. At the same time, globally speaking, you don't want the Denver Broncos to be in a limited possession game where they could still beat you. In this particular game, there was only 1 drive of double-digit plays. The two teams combined for 27 possessions. Some of that, again, is because they're committing turnovers at such a frantic rate. But one of the reasons that the Lions made some of those mistakes is that they were also just flat out getting stopped. They had 3 3-and-outs in the first half, on top of the total number of turnovers that they ended up committing. Houston Texans, the same type of thing. So many of their drives were just stopped in their tracks. When you look at the two teams, certainly the Texans are in much worse shape. Very straightforwardly, they're in worse shape from a record perspective. But you also know that unlike the Lions, for whom this game is a little bit fluky with all of the turnovers, the Texans simply can't move the ball. And you now have CJ Stroud looking, and you go back to some of the body language types of things. He looks utterly demoralized out there. He looks like he's having a horrible time playing football, which is the polar opposite of where he was last season. You mentioned that touchdown to Tank Dell. It was a spectacular interception. At the same time, the only reason it could be a spectacular interception was because Stroud waited so long to throw it and then threw it so softly. Now we have some situations like that Derek Carr pass to Alvin Kamara where you're like, yeah, throw that one softly, get it down there, but make sure it's very easy to catch. The Kamara drop was almost because the ball was so easy to catch that he thought it was impossible to not catch it. But you can't throw up a lollipop when there's not that much ground and the defender is going to be able to get back and make a play. You got to get that ball there.
We crushed Kyler Murray for the pass that he didn't throw to Trey McBride in week 9. This interception might have been a worse throw because he's seen where the player was, and we still didn't get the play to happen. But yeah, Stroud hasn't looked good. Obviously, Nico Collins was activated from injured reserve, but wasn't active for this game. I do think that will help, and obviously he's lost out on Stephon Diggs as well. So the cast of characters that he is playing with has been limited severely. Any final thoughts, Shawn, on week 10? Other than all the teams have worked out the issues in week 10 and week 11 will be a masterpiece.
Yeah, week 11 is going to be great. I'm very excited for it.
I know what was wrong with week 10, Shawn. Brock Bowers was on a bye.
Yeah, we didn't have Jayden Reed. We didn't have Brock Bowers. Those two things disappointing. We didn't get a second consecutive. I mean, when you go off like JSN did, you want to get right back out there as opposed to have like 2 weeks of practice. This week, though, we're not going to have Trey McBride. You're not going to have Chuba Hubbard. You're not going to have Tyrone Tracy or Malik Neighbors. Certainly there are people out there who are like, we're not going to have Kate Otten. Do people care about that? And you're like, you shouldn't get credit for drafting Kate Otten.
Not going to have Bucky Irving.
You're not going to have Bucky Irving. So all of those things will be further issues to overcome. Colm, we talk about depth all the time. The depth is going to be tested. 3 of the next 4 weeks, you have basically half of the NFL on a bye. The final week of the FFPC to make the postseason, you have 6 teams on the bye, including Jamar Chase and Josh Allen. In week 14 in the FFPC Championship, you have 6 teams on the bye, including the Baltimore Ravens juggernaut, including Bo Nix? Now that Bo Nix is clearly a QB1, are people starting him? And sadly, you're not going to have Jayden Daniels. So that depth, very important as we go through. Colm, the little quote, the headline for this week's Monday piece comes from the IT crowd. One of the things that I personally enjoy, because I like to see the names and I like to see these little grouping of teams that fit with individual co-managers. I can keep my teams straight because my co-managers are all categorized by a certain television show. Eric and I have drafted a number of teams that I'll have to go back and look through this week. Going into this week, they were doing quite well. The Stephon Diggs injury did hurt us, but they are all IT crowd themed. And this week's quote was about Morris Moss letting people know that there was a fire. Sending out that email.
For people who haven't seen the IT crowd, I would highly recommend going back and watch. I think it's aged very well. It's still it's one of those ones that when there's nothing to watch, myself and my wife will throw an episode on. Shawn, I've mentioned in the past about the Great British Bake Off. It's on at the moment. Noel Fielding is one of the hosts of that. He is the guy who appears sometimes in the closet of the IT crowd. But we are going to leave it there with a look ahead to a joyous NFL Week 11. That is what we are hoping for. And once again, as Shawn has mentioned there, thanks to the NFL schedule makers for very creatively backloading as many of the buys as they possibly could. It's a wonderful idea, and I hope they continues for many seasons to come. But we will be back with another show later this week. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. If you haven't checked out the Monday one, drop back and listen to it. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out all of Shawn's work, including that Monday piece, including as it comes out later in the week, the Zero RB Universe up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.